And no need to repeat my name, Bukeni Waruzi. I am working for Free the Slaves, and I'm really so happy to join all of you from across Africa and also some other parts of the world. Now, it is very common and it becomes a tradition that almost every year we meet together, to discuss very critical and promising approaches to eradicate forced labor, human trafficking, child labor, and modern slavery in Africa. I know it is a time where things are not going in the right direction. We have seen the numbers that came from ILO giving a kind of a rather blunt statistics that for forced labor amount to up to $236 billion in profit. We know all the statistics that exist in terms of human trafficking, bringing up to more than 150 billion US dollars a year. And we know that, when it comes to Africa, whether it is a destination part of the world or in a kind of a source part of the world, is all of these businesses are affecting our own communities and of course, the daily lives of millions of Africans as they try to seek a better life and get tricked into these illegal issues. Now, there are many things happening in Africa. Some of them are very wonderful, are very good, but there are also other small things that are happening that we need to discuss here. And it cannot be, this forum is a better place, a better space that really help us to kind of to come as as one to discuss these very issues, to share knowledge, to learn from each other, and also to see how we're gonna work together as a network, as a coalition, to tackle modern slavery, forced labor, child labor, and modern slavery. We all know that these issues happen really locally. It's not a fiction. They happen in our own communities. So, and the solutions will never come from outside. They will come from our own communities as well. So, and we are here to discuss those solutions as we know those problems or what those problems are. So we have brought together here the best best brains you can find on the continent when it comes to this issue. The most experts from academia, civil society, but most importantly from survivors, but also other agencies such as the United Nations and government as well. So these kind of diversity of experts, bringing in diverse views on what happens and how to tackle them, it's very important. And the subject, which really talking about justice and awareness raising, really hit at the very core of why it is matters. All these things are wrong. How do we make sure justice is served for those victims? As there are so many. I have my own small example. I had a chance to travel to Ghana a couple years ago, and I saw firsthand so many young people, 18, 17, 20, 19, that our partners there, PACODEP and really IMG and others were able to kind of free from Lake Volta region where they were being used as fishes. So, and that is just wrong. Instead of going to school, they spend almost, many years of their lives, trying to find fish, and whose fish will never answer any problems when it comes to their daily needs, whether it is food or other basic needs, medications, and some social protection. So how do we make sure that these issues aren't happening? So there is need for education in our own communities. But also we know trafficking is very rampant everywhere. I don't want to give the example of Senegal, where I also had a chance to travel and saw firsthand, some of our sisters from Nigeria being trapped into sex trafficking, and those are wrong. So the theme here, really, the subject, cannot be right really when these issues are kind of increasing. So, I think we have the right theme. We have the right brains and expertise, I say. We have the right space to discuss and learn more from this issue. Now, this could not be possible without really some of the work that was done by many of the colleagues here. I'm so happy and honored to see familiar friends and colleagues and faces that we have worked with, in many areas. So thank again to the committee that put together this wonderful theme and try to make sure we have an agenda that is structured in a way that really speaks to the issue. So really, thank you so much. And also thank you to the team, Free the Slaves team, that really helped to put together the logistics. Of course, there are not so many, but really from Giselle to Aline to Jacqueline, Isa, and Faith, and everybody at Free the Slaves. Of course, Bernadette, who also played the role being member of the committee, but also Free the Slaves team, to really make sure the logistics and the space is ready for this kind of wonderful discussion. Now, we are meeting online as part of the choice that was made, as we did meet in person almost a couple years ago. Of course, the next Africa Forum will be in person. Hopefully, we're going to have also a chance to meet each other in person. But let me say, we lost one of our colleagues from Senegal who really attended the Africa Forum, and 1 year later, he had to respond to the God, to God's call. Our heart and thought with his family and also his organization and community that he was serving. So again, really, thank you so much. We'll be here and to answer any questions. And I appreciate really Davina for being our expert MC and making sure everything is going well. And thank you for support. And I want also to thank our donors, Freedom Fund, for all the support really that they have provided us, the Daniel X Foundation, the ILO, and any other person, individual that made sure that we have the resources that we need. But also, most importantly, also want to thank Walk Free for their incredible support that really made sure that we can have this forum today. So thank you so much, all of you. And I wish you wonderful forum. I'll be here to follow all the wonderful discussions and presentations. And I can't wait to get into the real matters. Thank you again, and I yield back to you, Davina.
Thank you, Bukeni. What a great introduction. And I love that idea that the solutions will be coming from within the regions led by the voices. And that's really been the inspiration behind these regional forums that you've started. So thank you so much for giving us all this opportunity to hear from the experts on the ground. With that, we're going to have our keynote address about what actionable justice looks like in Africa from another one of our dear friends, Awa Francisca Mbuli, from the Survivor Network in Cameroon. She's such an incredible survivor leader. She started this Survivor Network group. She's also the 2022 Ashoka Fellow for Anglophone West Africa. She's won all of these awards. She's a trafficking in persons from the US State Department, trafficking in persons hero. And more importantly, she just really embodies the vibrancy of the survivor movement and the uniqueness that each survivor voice brings to this issue. So I'm so excited to introduce her for our keynote address.
Thank you, Davi. Good afternoon, everyone from Cameroon, distinguished guests, fellow advocates, survivors, and all those committed to ending the scourge of human trafficking in Africa. Today, we gather not just to acknowledge the horrors of this crime, but to ignite a firestorm of action. We must move beyond awareness and mere pronouncement to a future where justice is not an ideal, but a tangible reality for every victim of human trafficking and related abuses. Human trafficking robs Africa of its most precious resource, its people, from children stolen from their homes to adults lured for false promises. The human cost is immeasurable. But beyond the individual stories lies a network of exploitation that feeds on poverty, weak governance, and a culture of impunity. Justice in the fight against human trafficking cannot be a luxury. It must be the cornerstone of our strategy. To me, to fellow survivors, actionable justice means prioritizing victim support where survivors are not just used to get statistics, but be looked upon as individuals who deserve comprehensive care, physical and mental health support, access to legal avenues for redress, and why not engage them in the anti-human trafficking fight? Actionable justice means empowering law enforcement where we have well-trained, well-resourced law enforcement units equipped to dismantle trafficking networks, apprehend perpetrators, and build a strong cases for prosecution. Actionable justice means cross-border collaboration where human trafficking is a global crime and all African nations must work together, share intelligence, as well as harmonize legal frameworks for effective investigation and prosecution. Actionable justice means strengthening the justice system where we need to robust legal systems with specialized courts and judges trained to handle human trafficking cases, swift and fair trials that uphold perpetrators accountable for their crimes. Actionable justice means building community engagement where awareness and sensitization campaigns is very vital, as well as empowering citizens to identify warning signs, report suspected cases, and challenge the normalization of exploitation. Ending human trafficking requires a united African front. We must demand accountability for our government, work with civil society organizations, and engage with the private sector to engage ethical recruitment practices and eliminate supply chains tainted by exploitation. We must be holistic and intentional in our approach, not forgetting complete intersectionality, thereby interconnecting social categorization such as race, class, gender, sexual orientation, disability, age, since these are situations that create overlapping and independent system of discrimination in the anti-human trafficking fight. To conclude, actionable justice for human trafficking is not a distant dream. It is a fight we can and will win. Let us hold ourselves and each other accountable. Let us move from rhetoric to action. Let this be the generation that breaks the chains of human trafficking in Africa. Let us build a future where every person, every child walks in freedom and dignity. Together, let us turn the tide of human trafficking and make actionable justice a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Awa. That was beautiful. That was very beautifully said. Thank you. So now we are moving on to our next panel. Our first panel, it will be reflecting on the numbers. What are the emerging trends in human trafficking in Africa? As one of the founding authors for the Global Slavery Index and the Global Estimates of Modern Slavery with the ILO, I'm very excited to hear what these speakers have to say. We have Jacqueline Mwende, who, in addition to being a close colleague and a friend, she's an amazing Pan-African feminist, and she's really worked on global and regional anti-trafficking plans for leading world governments and UN agencies. She's worked specifically in Kenya, where where I believe she's still based with her as like a super mom working on this issue and looking at specifically how to protect children in this space. She has advanced degrees in human rights law and policy, and she really incorporates that into her work with Free the Slaves, building all of this survivor movement in the region. So I'm so glad that Jacqueline's here. And then we have Naseema Claren from the International Organization for Migration. She's been working on migration management for almost 2 decades, and she has exceptional experience in this region, specifically in Mauritius, Chad, Tunisia, Senegal, and other places. She is the Senior Regional Protection Specialist for West and Central Africa at IOM, and she's based in Dakar. And she also has 3 masters, which in my opinion should just be equivalent to a PhD at this point. So welcome to Jacqueline and Naseema. We are so looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Davina, for that wonderful introduction. So I have a PowerPoint presentation which my colleague will project, and then we can be able to talk about reflecting on the numbers. Specifically, I'll be looking at the emerging trends in with a special focus on Eastern Central Africa. So it's a kind of just throwing some of the nuggets of information that is useful for us that we can chew on and discuss on the issues that are emerging in the region. So thank you so much as I wait for the presentation to be projected. Okay, so let me start. As you have heard, my name is Jacqueline Mwende. I am the Senior Regional Manager for Eastern Central Africa for Free the Slaves. And I also double as the Survivor Engagement Lead for the organization. So welcome to this presentation. So if you have questions or additions or, just a suggestion on what I'm going to present, you can note it down. I think we'll have some sessions just talk about it. So you will be able to put your questions, comment, or concern on the chat, and then we'll be able to see it and read it out and respond to it. So next. Okay, so I I think most of us do understand what human trafficking is, but I didn't want to leave it to chance, because maybe could be having people who are attending this kind of discussion for the first time. So when we talk about human trafficking, we talk about recruitment, transfer, transportation, harboring, receipt of persons by means of threat, use of force, coercion, fraud, deception, abuse of power for the purposes of exploitation. And, you know, having known what constitutes human trafficking, understanding the trends or understanding how things are moving and how the dynamics of human trafficking are changing is usually very important, because of informing the interventions and policies that can be applicable from time to time. Next. All right, so I'm looking at Eastern Central Africa, looking at countries like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Democratic Republic of Congo, and others that are, you know, within this colorful part of this wonderful continent of ours. And one thing that makes this region be vulnerable to issues of human trafficking, there are issues of conflict in some of the countries here. And then we also have issues of economic disparities. Some of the countries are struggling economically because of, you know, the history of maybe war, history of conflict, and even history of political instability, and also corruption and climate change, and also issues of migration from, you know, from within the East Africa and Central Africa region, and also moving to other parts of Africa, Northern Africa, Southern Africa, as well as the Gulf, and also other countries, the European countries, and so forth. So those are some of the, you know, the dynamics that, you know, contribute to the issues of and vulnerabilities of trafficking in the region. Next. Okay, so when we talk about human trafficking, especially in the in Africa in general, not even East Africa, we cannot be oblivious of the connection with colonial and post-colonial practices that have influenced the current trends. So we know, like in the coastal part of the Eastern Africa, that was the belt where slave trade was happening, where the Arabs were coming to take people. So when you look at what is happening today in terms of human trafficking, there was that, I would say it's like a footprint that has been left, which has changed over time, but the root is still the same, of exploitation and, you know, cheap labor and abuse of human rights. So when we look at the statistics, sadly to speak, when we look at the statistics from 2019 up to now, or up to, you know, latest last year, you'll find that the numbers have increased despite us having organizations, governments, international organizations in the space working on this area. You'll find that the numbers are steadily increasing of victims and survivors of human trafficking. So, for example, in 2023 alone, over 4,000 cases were reported in East Africa alone. This, I haven't included those that are not the invisible victims or survivors of human trafficking. I've not also included some of the abuses that are classified like other abuses in some of the legal jurisdictions. And also, I haven't looked at the broader West Africa, where not West Africa, Central Africa, where getting data in a combined way has been an issue. So that is something that I also discuss later, why we, despite also having those trends going up, we are not able to say exactly what are the numbers we are having. This number, I would say it's downplayed. It could be double of this number. Next. Okay, so when we look at the statistic in a more detailed way in the region and looking at what are the number of reported cases that we have. For example, when we look at 2019, we had like 3,500 cases, and then we look at 20 last year is 5,200. So it means the numbers have been increasing despite. So that's something that I'll discuss about the gaps and what is happening really despite the efforts and the resources that are being put in this effort. And then when you look again, you find the highest number of victims of trafficking are children and women, and men constitute 10%. But what I would say is that men are usually the silent victims of this crime because of the cultural underpinnings in the African culture of the position of men and the vulnerability of men. So you'll find that there are many men or males who undergo trafficking, human trafficking, but they do not identify as such, or there's a stigma attached to a man, showing the vulnerability that they were trafficked. So you find that there's a gap there of having the male victim and the male survivor into the space of data, and also to the space of the movement, and also knowing strategies. Because even when you look at most of the shelters in most of these countries only cater for women and children, but there are no shelters specifically for male victims of human trafficking. And when we look also at the types of exploitation that are happening in this region, number one of the exploitation is labor trafficking. It goes across all those countries in East and Central Africa. Then we have sexual exploitation, then 10% of child soldiers when we are looking at areas like the Democratic Republic of Congo, looking at the Sudan, and also looking at the Central African Republic. So those are, and then you find the child soldiers, this 10%, it's looking at the male child soldier. So if there's a girl who has been taken in war, who has been taken into war, they tend to be classified as victims of sexual exploitation because of the role that they take, or the abuse, the type of the abuse that happens for children who are female in war situation. It happens, it's sexual exploitation. Also, there are victims and survivors who can even cut across all the types of exploitation. You'll find that a victim is, a person is a victim of labor trafficking. They also, as layer of sexual exploitation, they can also have a layer of being a child soldier, especially if they are a girl or female, because they will be taken there to cook for the rebels. Then they'll be also act as they'll be sexually exploited. And then they'll be, they'll be in the camp. Some of them can even bear arms even when they are female. And then there's organ trafficking that has emerged and which is taking root really. These numbers are just raising on human trafficking. So probably as we move on, because the cases keep on getting reported and reported all the time. For example, this Kenya, which organ trafficking is linked with labor trafficking. So people are trafficked for labor, and they're also trafficked at the same time for organ trafficking. So next. So the increase on labor trafficking, which is like the prominent type of trafficking in the region, comes from the sectors of agriculture, sectors of mining, construction, and domestic work. When we look at domestic work, you find almost 99% of victims of domestic work are women and girls. But when you look at the issues of mining, construction, now you start seeing the dynamics changing. We start having males and boys in it. In agriculture, you find that it's a mixture of both genders. But I also think it's on, it's based on the gender roles that have been set. What is the work of men? What is the work of a woman? And I think it follows the same trend when it is, grouping itself into where, victims are being placed by their perpetrators. So then there's rise in child trafficking so much over the years. And this has come as a result of poverty, lack of education, and displacement due to conflict, because we know what displacement does to the family fabric of the society, and leaving children vulnerable to fend for themselves, and then they become target of human trafficking. Then this emerging form of exploitation, organ trafficking, that is increasing in areas of conflict, as well as areas where people are trafficked for labor. Then cyber trafficking, I think this came very prominent during the time of the pandemic, where now, people had to change tact, there were lockdowns and everything. And, contrary to what people thought, that, the lockdown somehow locked things, it found a way to thrive underground, and even in a very serious way. So next. Okay, so I've already said some of socioeconomic factors like the poverty, movement from rural area to urban areas. We have some of the cities that are very notorious for that, Nairobi and Kampala, people moving from, the rural areas coming to the city, either for domestic work or other kinds of labor, construction, and so forth. Then we do have a sort of displacement, and also the phenomena of people being trafficked from IDP or internally displaced camps, or even refugee camps. Then there's urbanization. So urbanization also, it's making it very lucrative, like for people to move, to be lured to the city for the search of greener pastures. Next. Okay, so some of the regional hotspots here, we have Nairobi, Kampala, and Kinshasa, and then also the border areas between Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and South Sudan, as well as Somalia. Then you know, the case studies are mostly high rates of domestic work exploitation, especially movement from, you know, other East African countries to other Eastern African country. For example, from Rwanda, from Uganda to Kenya, from Tanzania to Kenya for domestic work, and then also forced labor in mining in DRC, especially even for children, because children are able to maneuver in those mining dungeons because of their size. So they are sent to go inside there. So they become like they are, you know, they are the ones who are needed in that business. And it's very dangerous because most of the times those mines collapse. And sometimes you find even there's no oxygen and the child can die inside that long canal. Then in Kampala, we have issues of child trafficking for labor, sexual exploitation, and also child begging, especially of a vulnerable community, the Karamoja in northern Uganda, where, you know, children are brought to the city to beg. Next. So I think, you know, for the next 10 years or so, we will be talking about the impact of COVID-19. And I think we did a research at the height of the COVID, trying to see what has happened to the space of human trafficking and forced labor specifically. So we found that the impact of the COVID increased vulnerability of communities, of families, of individuals, even individuals who have been rescued before from human trafficking, and they were fairly stable when the COVID came, because we knew COVID destabilized even very rather stable businesses. So you found that we got survivors who would have said that they are already empowered coming back to shelters because of the COVID-19 and what it did to the economic situation. Then there's also, you know, adaptation of traffickers. So during that time, that is when we saw an increased use of online platforms in recruitment of victims, and also because people were very vulnerable, not even victims, people who are not even, many of the survivors from 2019 up to now were recruited during the height of the COVID, because many people, many society were very vulnerable. So if someone sends you a message on WhatsApp during a lockdown, where, you know, you don't have work and everything, and they say we have something you can do, you know, so that was very increased the numbers, especially during that time. And I think that impact is still being felt post the COVID. Next.
Thank you, Jacqueline. We actually have 1 minute warning for you.
Okay. So let's move fast. I think I'm almost done. So challenges we have law enforcement challenges, limited resources. I've talked about data gaps, where we are not able to get the correct numbers. Then we have resource limitations to support anti-trafficking programs and also victims and survivors. Next. Recommendations. So policy recommendations, I think there is need to increase funding for anti-trafficking efforts. And I'm happy we have ILO, IOM, and UNODC here. So there's need for that because it's slowly shrinking the funding on the anti-trafficking efforts. And it's competing against other issues in the society. And then also, training for law enforcement, victim protection, and data collection, because you cannot address something without knowing what you're talking about in terms of data. Data is very important, even establishing this centralized database and so forth, and then expanding support services, including shelters, legal aid, and rehabilitation to victims of human trafficking. Then I have the last slide on survival leadership, which is something that is very dear to me. I had to make a whole slide of it. So the role of survivors in everything that we are doing in the movement, because they bring unique perspectives and experience to anti-trafficking efforts. And just to mention some, examples, we have Survivor Network in Kenya, Survivor Network in DRC, that are participating in advocating for policy changes on how, the government can, implement their roadmaps, and also working with organizations and working with other survivors. So impact of survival leadership can be felt by organizations that have allowed or opened a space to receive the expertise of survivors, not just as recipients of services, but also as peers in the movement who can help us to develop best practices in victim support and also rehabilitation and empowerment informed by lived experiences. So thank you so much.
Davina, should I just go ahead with my presentation or?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
I think we have Dr. Balfour. I think we have slated around 6 to 8 minutes. Is that your understanding? Or was yours?
I'll try my best.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Okay, let me just share my screen. Can you please confirm whether you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you very much. And you're seeing the big screen, right? Just the normal one, huh? Okay.
Yes.
Right, so okay, thank you so much. So thank you very much, dear colleagues and partners from Free the Slaves, for the invitation extended to IOM. It's a true honor and pleasure to be there with you. Actually, I think what you will hear from me on emerging trends in human trafficking in West and Central Africa will sound very familiar, especially after what we've just heard about Eastern Horn of Africa. I'm afraid trends are quite similar. The way I would like to do this is in 2 steps. I think it's important to understand the trends and patterns in West and Central Africa. It's also useful to have a quick look at the general migratory trends in the region. So these are the two aspects that I will cover in this presentation. And then I understand there will be another panel later on to discuss the gaps and response that we're trying to provide at IOM. So regarding the trends in our region first, what you can see, just hang on a second, did it go too fast? Yes, here we are. So what we all know, I believe, is that migration in Africa involves large numbers of international migrants moving both within and from the region. And what you can see in this table is that most international migration occurs within the region. The latest available international migration stock data that dates back to 2020 shows that around 21 million Africans were living in another African country. And the Western Central Africa region or sub-region that we cover here makes no exception to this, with 83% of immigrants living in countries of the Western and Central Africa region, and so who are from another country of that same region, with most of them currently living in Côte d'Ivoire and Nigeria. Now, mobility patterns are largely driven by employment and economic opportunities in labor-intensive areas. Labor mobility involves temporary, seasonal, and permanent migration of workers, with countries such as Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana as key destinations in this region. So in that sense, I'm flagging this because economic and labor mobility is the most significant migration driver. And as we just heard, and will be the same here, it's also going to be one of the main sources, one of the main types of exploitation. But obviously, other reasons for migration should also be looked at, including family reunification, education opportunities, conflicts, violence, insecurity, and environmental changes and disasters, notably at the country or area of origin that are affected by droughts, by floods, by wildfires, heavy rains, etc. So the point here is that each year we witness tens of thousands of migrants from this region who undertake highly risky, irregular migration journeys. And on these journeys, abuses are extremely common, unfortunately, including trafficking. This is just to quickly show you what the routes are that are being used in this region. You can see on the top of the slide, there is the Western African Atlantic route, the Western Mediterranean route, and the Central Mediterranean route. So both leading to the Canary Islands in Spain, so through Europe, to Morocco, or through Morocco and Algeria, also to Europe, and also to Libya and Tunisia. And what we notice here is that interregional migration routes that are taken by migrants, they regularly shift according to changes in migration legislation, policies and controls. We also saw the impact of the COVID on this. However, the routes themselves do not evolve that much. We did witness, though, that there was the resurgence of this Western African Atlantic route. Between January and December 2023, more than 39,000 migrants reached the Canary Islands. They reach it irregularly after crossing by boat from the coast of West Africa. It's one of the most dangerous routes, maritime routes in the world. Only for 2023, 47 shipwrecks were recorded along that route, resulting in the death or disappearance of 958 migrants. That is almost double the numbers of the year before. And we obviously know that this figure is probably underestimated, as many shipwrecks are not reported. And then in terms of migratory trends, I have to say a word about this new route from Western Central Africa to Latin America. It's a new route. We're noticing it. People can actually get without need for a visa to countries like Panama, Honduras, Mexico, or Nicaragua. And from there, they continue often by foot. And their purpose is to try and reach the United States. So again, tens of thousands of migrants from this region are undertaking highly risky irregular migration journeys, either on their way to Europe or to North America or across the African continent. I'd like to repeat here that really 83%, even 85 almost, of the movements are interregional movements. And from here, I'd like to take a deeper dive into the risks of protection that these migrants are exposed to under various forms of violence, exploitation, and abuse, including trafficking in human beings. So most of the victims from this region are detected in Western and Southern Europe, in North Africa, and in the Middle East. Most of them are either citizens of the country of detection or citizens of other Western and Central Africa countries. The most common forms of exploitation are sexual exploitation and forced labor. Sexual exploitation of women and girls, very striking for this region. They're in a big majority coming from Nigeria, and they're exploited in various countries in the region, including Niger, Mali, Senegal, to name a few. Labor exploitation of women, men, as was rightly pointed at, boys and girls, for domestic work also happens within the region, but also in the Middle East. And similarly to the Eastern Horn, we also see multiple forms of exploitation in mining sites, notably through Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad, where we encounter issues including sexual exploitation, child labor, and labor exploitation of male miners in those mining sites. Although, as was rightly said, also male victims of trafficking are maybe less visible. There is a specific trend in this region that is linked to the traditional gold mining sites. There is a special belt, that goes throughout Senegal, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger. It's called the New Gold Rushes. We haven't been able to do as much research as we would like there, but we do have reliable indicators and testimonies of sexual exploitation of children and adults, child labor, and this exploitation of minors. And for the small research that we did in southern Senegal, we witnessed and we saw that several migrant women actually stated that they had no information on their destination upon departure. They did not know what they would travel, why they did not know that they would travel to the mining sites, because in fact, they were hoping to reach Europe and find a job. And they also mentioned their lack of freedom, the debt system that forced them to repay large sums of money to their smugglers. About child trafficking, more specifically, just to highlight that here in this region, what we see is that it is fostered by social norms and traditional practices, as what we call here the confiage. So families handing over their children to Quranic schools, for example, and not all of them being actually very reliable. So these children are called the talibé in this region. And in fact, most of the children are actually forced to beg, and they're experiencing very severe abuses. And this is something that we encounter in Guinea-Bissau, in Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, and the Gambia, notably. It affects usually boys for that one, who are so entrusted by their parents to be provided with religious education normally. But unfortunately, this is not what is happening. And an important word on this, we were discussing data also in the first presentation. It's definitely an issue here too, despite the lack, but despite the lack of updated figures on the number of children that are forced to beg, we know and we feel that tens of thousands could actually be involved. Another trend that has come to our attention is exploitation in sports, trafficking in sports. So what we've noticed here is that the opportunities to migrate and join football clubs in regions are extremely limited. So migrant smugglers and traffickers are taking advantage of young people's dreams, making them believe that they'll be playing in big leagues in Europe, luring thousands from the sub-region with false hopes of becoming professional footballers. And so once they have paid their football agents, they're usually abandoned upon arrival, and they often end up as victims of forced labor or sexual exploitation, among other abuses and violations. And here, what I would like to flag is that this is namely a consequence of the absence of regular pathways, with athletes, sports students who have no access to protection mechanisms and who become socioeconomically extremely vulnerable. I will stop here for this part of my presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
Hi, thank you so much for that. So now we're moving on to our next panel, which is what is stopping us, identifying critical gaps in the prevention of human trafficking in Africa. And our moderator is going to be Evans Munga from Terre de Home. I also have a couple of announcements. I would like to say that we will have French speakers on this panel. So if you are an English speaker, you will also have to go to the little globe on your command screen and click English language. Pour les personnes qui parlent français, vous avez besoin de changer votre langue sur votre écran. Il y avait une petite globe qui nommé interprétation. Vous pouvez la changer, la langue entre français là. And also, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. We will try to get to them as soon as we can. So now I'll be handing this over to Evans Munga. Now, Evans is a child protection specialist and a program development expert with over 10 years of active practice. He's a program manager at Terre de Home in the Netherlands, and he's been working his whole career to stop exploitation in children. Evans, I'm so glad that you're here to moderate this next panel. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you. Sorry, Evan, are you able to turn on your camera and speak? Is there a technical issue?
It seems as though Evans is having some technical difficulties, so I will jump in just to keep the process moving. And Evans, please feel free to jump in when you are able to get it sorted out. Just because I'm jumping right in, I'll just quickly introduce myself. I am Dr. Giselle Balfour, and I am the head of programs at Free the Slaves. And as Davina mentioned, this panel will focus on what is stopping us, identifying critical gaps in the prevention of human trafficking in Africa. And so I would like to call on our first panelist, Mr. George Achebra, who is joining us all the way from Ghana. Evans, I see you coming back. Are you there? Evans? Okay, seems that he's still having some issues. So I'm going to call on Mr. Achibra to join us. Mr. Achibra, are you here?
I'm here. Good morning to our colleagues.
Back.
And
okay.
Thank you for a section like this.
Thank you for joining us. Evans, can you hear us? It seems that Evans is frozen, so don't worry. We're going to keep it moving. Mr. Achibra, I'm going to hand over to you for you to share your very quick presentation with us this morning.
Thank you very much. I think a program like this is helping us to see the way forward. PACODEP I represent as the director in Ghana, and it's a national NGO that works in fighting to combat human trafficking. We normally narrow ourselves to child trafficking in the fishing industry in the country, and we've been linking up to most of the activity. We are directly implementing partners to free the slaves, and we love working with all members. So before I go in, I have to salute all our panel members and people who are listening from far and near. Briefly of the human trafficking in Africa, I think over the years, most of the African countries fall victim to the supply chain in human trafficking as a source, destination, and even the transit. Which of course, Ghana, my country, cannot be left out. It is both internal and cross-border trafficking where children move around and beyond of persons for greener pasture. And that has given us all these problems over the years. Some of the issues that we want to look at, what stops us is probably the critical gaps that we have to look at. And we're looking at inadequate legislation and policy framework. Here we are saying that I think the kind of legislation and the policy that we need to guide us as a moving tool, we have to hyphen it in such a way that we'll be able to work and reconcile and see the way forward so that the laws within African countries, within even the sector of where we are working, we can strengthen those laws very well and we'll move forward. I think these are something that we need to look at. Also, we're looking at limited awareness and public education, which of course we need to vigorously put the education, not within the national level, but I think across borders and even Africa as a whole, where we can have a kind of engagement. And as we normally have in-person programs that we run, pure example is what we did in Kigali. We are thinking that I think we need to close our ranks so close so that our education and the policies that we go according to it, we may critically look at that. We're also looking at some of the gaps as insufficient support services for survivors. We move around. Perpetrators are very clever and they move fast. After we have gotten the survivors and support services for them, and even we go beyond to the families, there must be a root cause, and therefore we need to look at what has even driven these victims to move out and what is chasing them. And for that matter, anytime we get them, can we sustain them so that they may not be re-trafficked, the kind of support. Ineffective collaboration and coordination among stakeholders. We all moving from different directions, but I think we need to get a central point where collaboration and coordination will work. Whether we're working towards prevention and whether apart from prevention and protection, coordinations and prosecution alongside as we work. I think we need to look at how best we can bring ourselves together. But not for the least, we also look at limited resources and funding. As an African country and with the nations surrounding us, if there can be a kind of collaborations, how best we can get and gather, raise funds to get resources, and then go alongside with our funding to make us get to where we are moving. Having said that, well, what is stopping us? I think we need to look at some of the causes of these gaps, and looking at the political and economic instability within the Africa sub-region. It can even start from one nation to another nation. But I think the political will that is moving there, if politically we can establish, we can make our stability, we can get our roots get to the ground, it will give us a very good step for us to move, and so that we move forward. We must also not look aside for cultural and social norms perpetuating trafficking. In national levels, in the countries, our culture plays a very vital role. And among some, we try to move such a way that our cultural dynamics will not even give room for people to be trafficked and then to be abused or whatever abuse. If we talk about labor exploitation, if we're talking about sexual exploitation, in most of these areas, our culture draw us back. And for that matter, it gives another room or a way for how people get out of our hands into neighboring countries. Limited capacity and training for law enforcement and services providers. If we take the prevention, protection, partnership, and prosecution in such a way, I mean our security, the police, and whoever the law enforcement need to be given the real knowledge. It will surprise you to know even the justices and all people who are working towards this are sometimes having limited in some capacity and knowledge, right? And we're looking at that. If we're able to give them the necessary capacity for training, it will also give. And lack of all this creates another way of getting people out. We cannot also forget about the almighty corruption and complicity among officials, interference, and people coming in from different directions to influence the law. So for this, we think that if we're able to work on this, I think they are all part of what is stopping us and give the causes of the gaps that are pinning into us. Last but not least, in the causes, we can look at many, but some lack of data and research on human trafficking in Africa. As we speak, we still have some openings about the way we are looking at some of the lack of research work, and there has also not been reliable data for various nations. And for that matter, we think that if we're able to get a lot of data, concrete data that we can rely. In my country, Ghana, can we speak of how many children are trafficked, how many human, elderly and women for sexual abuse and traveling for greener pastures? How many leave the country at this point in time? And so when we are able to get that, but then we look at the root causes that is giving way for this. Case studies on such areas. Almost all the African countries are struggling in the fight seeing this canker. And day in by day, persons are moving to the Western countries by road, by sea, and air. Based on some very exclusive, and in most areas, they go by different foul means, which they don't go by the real root cause. So countries, including my Ghana, Nigeria, and the Eastern and Central Africa, looking at the earlier speakers, we saw the routes by which people move from one end to another. And so having looked at this, we think we need to look at it that we all blame ourselves and blame our systems for how is affecting us. And I think no country in Africa has crossed to tier 1 or the rating in TIP report. So this is telling us that, yes, of course, we are doing our best, but the best still needs to be fastened. But the good thing about the success story among this is that no African country is resting. No African country is sleeping. We are all doing our small way in the best way of reaching the people and getting the perpetrators for prosecution and what have you. We're doing a lot of vigorous education. We are trying to look at what are the loopholes. And so these are some of the specific countries or regions in Africa that are struggling in human trafficking. But the best one that we can think is that, yes, of course, even though there's a challenge, but we are doing our best to see how we can overcome some of these things. Getting into recommendation of some of the gaps, we need to bring our minds back on then we put all our hands on deck, strengthening legislation and policy framework. It tells us the laws that we either have to strengthen the laws, we let the law bite, and then we see how we can work and get into the nip of the middle of the tree. If we do that, I think we'll move to another level, increase awareness and public education. And for here, I think our education does not need to be moving from theory. We need to give timelines alongside it, and it must be vigorous. All African countries must bring our hands together and see how serious it is. Because equally like the first speaker just said, human trafficking is robbing us with many of our resources, human resources, our lot of things that we have. Many people walk through the roads in the desert and die. People on the rivers and they die on the high seas. So it tells that if we increase our education, it must be part of our curriculum in our various schools. We also need to provide adequate support services for survivors and family members. There must be a kind of engagement. In Ghana, for instance, we have the REP project, which runs like a rural and the community engagement, where government is putting all resources to see what are the strengths, the alternative livelihood, which will strengthen communities and then get to themselves. Education is the central of all. So I think if we're able to put all those things so that people will not move from one end to another, enhance collaboration and coordination among stakeholders is also one of the key things that I think when we begin to link ourselves. What can Ghana do better? What can we learn from Nigeria and move and continue to do? Increase resources and funding. I think there must be a kind of a pool where all African countries will try to, from the ECOWAS level to African AU, all levels, every country needs to at least be charged with some kind of funding so that we use to fight it. As we move on, if we continue to be relying and saying we are all doing our best individually, I don't think it will take us to that point. In conclusion, I think human trafficking is a complex issue which is influenced by socioeconomic factors. Effective solutions require a multi-factored approach, addressing poverty, education, cultural norms, and legal enforcement. By combining efforts at the local, national, and international levels, societies can work towards eradicating human trafficking and ensuring a better future and a better movement of a country like countries all over Africa. It must not be a problem of a country in Ghana. It must not be something of the West Africa, the East Africa, the Central Africa. I think we need to bring ourselves together. Poverty along its all line has become one of the key points that we did. But having taken some knowledge from ILO conference in 2013, I realized that poverty has no leg. It has none of the senses that poverty deserves. But if we provide all this kind of senses to poverty, as an African countries, it will come to us. We are looking at certain things that is our norms. So finally,
Thank you, George.
I want to end here and thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George. Those were good presentation. Thank you for following the guidance and given, like you strike out the gaps, of course, you give out the recommendation and the conclusions. To the members and to the participants, you can just channel your questions. I've seen good recommendations and questions on the chat. So that was Ghana, West Africa. Let's go to another West Africa country, Senegal. Dr. Moody, you have seen how Church has done it. You can just do it in less than 5 minutes for the interest of time. Just give us the, what is stopping us? Give us the what. I mean, what is stopping us from, fighting and preventing human trafficking in Africa? And what are some of the gaps? And what are the push factors? What is causing these gaps? And of course, key recommendations, high-level recommendations, and we try to see how then we can marry from what our church has shared. Over to you, Modi, Dr. Modi. Is Dr. Modi here? Well, if Modi is not ready to present, we can have, yes?
Oui, je suis là. Vous m'entendez ou pas?
Please proceed.
Allô? Vous m'entendez? Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
On t'entend bien, oui, Modi, on t'entend bien.
Ah, très bien.
Yes, we can hear you.
OK. Bonjour à tous. Je suis donc Modi Ndiaye, secrétaire permanent de la cellule nationale de lutte contre la traite des personnes au Sénégal. Et je me réjouis de me joindre aux frères et sœurs du continent sur cette problématique très importante. Alors, réfléchir sur ce qui nous empêche d'avancer. Je n'ai pas fait de présentation PowerPoint, mais vous comprendrez pourquoi, parce que cette question est très large et appelle une réponse aussi très large. J'ai plutôt regroupé en différentes catégories des paramètres qui nous empêchent d'avancer. Le premier, c'est celui qui est relatif à la mondialisation. Pour dire tout simplement que la mondialisation de nos sociétés est un obstacle à la lutte contre la traite des personnes, puisque je prends 2 ou 3 illustrations. La migration illégale, la globalisation de la pauvreté, le fait que les réseaux, parce qu'en matière de traite des personnes, nous sommes en matière de criminalité transnationale organisée. Donc, la mondialisation a favorisé, a facilité l'exploitation des êtres humains par d'autres êtres humains et constitue un obstacle dans les actions que nous devons mener. L'Internet également. Vous savez très bien que la plupart des pays africains, les jeunes sont connectés et c'est un outil facilitateur pour beaucoup de choses, facilitateur pour le recrutement des jeunes, qui est un obstacle pour ceux qui luttent, puisque dans beaucoup de pays, les forces, soit de police ou de la justice, ne sont pas, même quand elles sont connectées, n'ont pas tous les outils nécessaires pour pouvoir contrer ce fléau. Autre élément lié à la mondialisation, c'est tout simplement la facilité avec laquelle l'argent, le profit des exploiteurs peut être transféré. Vous avez une victime dans un pays A, un recruteur, un exploiteur dans un pays B, l'argent transite et n'est pas visible grâce à l'Internet vers un pays C. Ça également, alors que nous savons que nous devons suivre la route de l'argent du trafic pour poursuivre les trafiquants. Donc, premier obstacle, la mondialisation. Le second, c'est celui qui est lié à la connaissance. Nous sommes, en matière de traite des personnes, il y a un obstacle lié à la connaissance. Quand on parle de trafic d'organes, quand on parle d'exploitation sexuelle, quand on parle de travail forcé, la connaissance nous empêche encore de franchir les barrières liées à la prévention, puisque quand on ne comprend pas tout à fait ce qui se passe, il est difficile de le prévenir. Donc l'enjeu de la connaissance est également une barrière importante. La troisième barrière qui nous empêche, c'est celle qui est liée à l'humain, l'enjeu humain, tout simplement. La traite s'accompagne de vulnérabilités, et dans ces vulnérabilités, nous avons les femmes, nous avons les migrants, nous avons les minorités, nous avons les enfants, et très souvent, quelqu'un l'a dit tout à l'heure, ceux qui exploitent utilisent ces vulnérabilités, ou toujours utilisent ces vulnérabilités. Donc, l'obstacle humain également, et nous empêche de prévenir. Vous avez beau dire à certaines catégories vulnérables de ne pas répondre à certaines annonces ou de ne pas suivre certaines routes, la réaction n'est pas forcément celle qu'on souhaite pour les défendre. L'autre obstacle également, c'est l'obstacle sociétal, tout simplement. Les politiques publiques ne prennent pas assez en compte cette question, ce qui fait que la prévention se heurte également aux hésitations ou à des politiques publiques un peu trop, pas assez encourageantes, pas assez hardies. La traite des personnes, pour la prévenir, pour l'attaquer, il faut faire une attaque frontale, et les politiques publiques sont souvent assez hésitantes ou pas assez fortes. Je vous prends par exemple au niveau de l'Union africaine, il y a un certain nombre d'initiatives qui ont été prises, mais qui sont restées à l'état de grands principes. Il n'y a pas eu vraiment d'initiatives concrètes, fortes, allant dans le sens de la prévention. L'opinion publique africaine est encore entre incrédulité et ignorance. Incrédulité parce qu'il arrive encore dans beaucoup de nos pays, où quand vous parlez de la traite des personnes, on se dit, mais est-ce que ça existe réellement? On a plus le souvenir de la traite des esclaves au sens classique avec l'Amérique et l'Europe, mais la traite des personnes elle-même, dans un certain nombre de sociétés, reste encore entre ignorance et incrédulité. Certaines pratiques, quelqu'un l'a dit tout à l'heure, certaines pratiques sociales et culturelles, illustration, c'est le confiage, où dans d'autres pays, on accepte d'exploiter certaines catégories parce qu'elles sont, je ne demande pas des différentes, mais parce qu'elles présentent des vulnérabilités. Je pense par exemple aux albinos dans certaines. Donc voilà, la société elle-même, dans sa composante sociale et culturelle, elle constitue également un obstacle. Les deux derniers obstacles à la prévention sont les obstacles juridiques et judiciaires. Juridiques, parce que la traite des personnes présente une incrimination complexe. Et très souvent, ceux qui sont chargés d'appliquer la loi, ceux qui sont chargés de poursuivre, ceux qui sont chargés même de prévenir, font la confusion entre, par exemple, le proxénétisme, la servitude, l'esclavage, le travail forcé. Donc, il y a un enjeu juridique également qui pose un obstacle. Et enfin, l'enjeu judiciaire. L'enjeu judiciaire, c'est le décalage qu'il y a entre la réalité des textes répressifs et les réponses invisibles. Voilà ce que je voulais dire en respectant le temps sur les éléments relatifs à ce qui nous bloque dans la prévention. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moody. Any recommendation you want to put forward? I can see you've just highlighted, if I can give a summary, especially you and George, especially from Ghana and Senegal, some of the issues cutting across West Africa. Of course, some of the preventive gaps we see there. One is, of course, issues of knowledge management. There is lack of awareness lack of data. You've highlighted issues of vulnerability. One of the push factors is poverty and, of course, societal values. You've talked about policy and, policy and public policy framework. You've talked about judicial justice system that is not, supporting the prevention of this kind of issues. Something related to what George actually highlighted. Any recommendation in 1 minute? What do you recommend based on the gaps that you've identified?
Ouais. En 1 minute, la recommandation majeure, c'est celle qui est liée à l'éducation. Plus les sociétés africaines seront éduquées et plus ces obstacles-là pourront être levés. Sur l'enjeu de connaissance, sur la politique publique, sur la globalisation, sur l'incrédulité, il n'y a que l'éducation qui peut faire reculer ces frontières. Et c'est une éducation qui doit être, notamment l'éducation à la tête des personnes, doit être intégrée dans les écoles, dans les universités, à tous les échelons, pour qu'on ait une société où les gens soient mieux éveillés, plus sensibilisés et plus à même d'identifier les phénomènes de traite des personnes. Donc l'éducation comme recommandation majeure à tous les niveaux.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moody. Appreciate for your insights, sharing from Senegal. So we move across Africa, moving down to Mauritania. We get Braham Habeid just to share some of the insights, especially on some of the critical gaps, especially in Mauritania. And we try to compare what is it that is from West Africa and, of course, coming down to Central Africa. Braham, go ahead. You have 5 minutes to showcase some of the critical gaps, or of course, preventing human trafficking. You have also some few minutes. You can bring in some recommendations. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup. J'espère que vous m'entendez. C'est bon? C'est bon?
C'est bon, on t'entend, oui.
Yes, we can
Voilà.
hear.
Yes, yeah, proceed.
Alors donc, merci beaucoup. Je suis très honoré par cette participation à ce panel avec mes frères et doyens africains et autres concernant cette problématique et je pense que d'abord, je vous félicite pour ce thème et je vous félicite pour ce forum parce que ça vient à point nommé. Pour nous autres activistes des droits de l'homme, nous avons toujours besoin d'échanger et d'apprendre les uns des autres. Et je tiens à vous dire ce qui nous bloque. Premièrement, je dois souligner que ce terme trafic des personnes est un terme assez flou, comme l'a dit mon prédécesseur, parce qu'on ne sait pas exactement c'est quoi le trafic des personnes. Et surtout que ça ne cadre pas trop sur nos réalités africaines. Ce qui est chez nous, c'est plutôt l'esclavage, c'est plutôt la discrimination, c'est les castes, des choses comme ça qui sont non moins importants, non moins pires, non moins choquants que par l'ONU. Je dois dire d'abord que la Mauritanie est peut-être en avance, en tout cas sur le plan institutionnel, en avance sur beaucoup de pays, parce que en Mauritanie, nous avons les pays à créer et une instance qui s'appelle Instance nationale de lutte contre le trafic des personnes, qui a un conseil d'orientation, dont un directeur exécutif qui fait son chemin. Ça, c'est sur ce que peut-être enlever le pour savoir. C'est clair? Vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez, monsieur? Messieurs, dites-moi oui ou non. Ah, voilà. Voilà, donc j'ai dit que je suis très ravi d'être parmi vous pour ce forum avec mes doyens africains. Et je vous remercie, je remercie les organisateurs de ce forum parce que ça vient vraiment à point nommé. C'est très important pour nous, activistes des droits de l'homme, de se réunir, d'échanger nos expériences et surtout quand il s'agit de parler, il est nécessaire que chacun sache ce qui se passe de l'autre côté pour qu'ensemble, nous pouvons conjuguer nos efforts pour aller de l'avant. J'ai dit que de prime abord, que cette idée de trafic des personnes n'est pas claire et ne cadre pas trop sur les réalités, sur nos réalités en Afrique. Parce que ce que nous avons ici en Afrique, ce n'est pas vraiment le trafic de personnes comme ça se trouve aux États-Unis ou en Europe, etc. Nous avons l'esclavage et nous avons les discriminations basées sur l'ascendance et le travail. Donc, le système de caste qui se trouve être des discriminations impardonnables et injustifiables. Et voilà, tout cela, je ne sais pas, est-ce que selon vous, selon les pays occidentaux, tout ça, ça rentre dans le cadre du trafic des personnes. Mais qui trafique qui? C'est ça l'idée, la question qui se pose. J'ai dit qu'à propos de la Mauritanie, la Mauritanie, sur le plan institutionnel, est peut-être en avance sur certains pays africains. Parce que la Mauritanie a créé depuis une année ce qu'on appelle l'instance nationale de lutte contre le trafic des personnes et des migrants. Et c'est une instance dotée d'un budget qui a un conseil d'orientation dont je suis le président et qui a un bureau exécutif et qui a un fonds dédié et surtout le trafic des migrants, aussi le trafic des migrants. Et ça, c'est sur le plan institutionnel. La question qui se pose, qu'est-ce qui nous bloque? À mon niveau et en Mauritanie, ce qui nous bloque, deux choses. Un, manque, absence absence de volonté politique. Quelque part, nos gouvernants n'affichent pas la volonté qu'il nous faut pour affronter la société. Parce que l'esclavage tel que vécu en Mauritanie est un esclavage sur un fond raciste. Parce que ce sont des Arabes, des Maures blancs qui mettent en esclavage des Noirs. Donc c'est un esclavage un peu aussi basé sur la religion, sur l'ignorance. Parce que c'est aussi la deuxième chose qui nous bloque, c'est l'ignorance, c'est le manque d'éducation, comme l'a dit mon doyen Modi Ndiaye. C'est aussi le manque d'éducation. Parce que les esclaves ou les anciens esclaves, même si ils font la majorité de la population mauritanienne, ils sont plus de 50% de la population mauritanienne, toutes composantes réunies. Malgré tout cela,
Braham, you have 2 minutes to conclude.
What?
You have 2 minutes to conclude.
Donc, avec tout cela, ils ne sont pas suffisamment éduqués. Il n'y a pas d'école dans leur village, ou presque pas. Il n'y a pas, vraiment une volonté d'aller de l'avant sur le plan de l'éducation. Aussi, la communauté arabe qui a mis cette population-là en esclavage, c'est elle qui a le pouvoir, tous les pouvoirs religieux, le pouvoir financier, le pouvoir politique, le pouvoir juridique. C'est eux qui sont les juges, c'est eux qui sont les magistrats. Et alors, ils n'appliquent pas les lois, même si la Mauritanie, sur le plan institutionnel, est en avance, parce que nous avons une loi qui incrimine l'esclavage, et l'esclavage est même dans notre constitution comme crime contre l'humanité. Malgré tout cela, il existe encore et il n'est pas combattu comme il faut, parce que les magistrats sont la plupart sont de la communauté des maîtres. Alors ça c'est un deuxième bloc. Troisième blocage. Si je me résume, je vais dire que ce qui nous bloque, c'est le manque de volonté politique. Quelqu'un va me dire que voilà, vous êtes en avance sur le plan institutionnel. Oui, nous sommes en avance sur le plan institutionnel. Nous sommes en avance sur le plan des lois. Mais nous sommes derrière tout le monde quand il s'agit de l'application de ces lois. Ces lois ne sont pas appliquées. Ces institutions ne travaillent pas. Ces institutions sont faites pour dire voilà, nous avons des institutions, mais en réalité, ils ne sont pas aptes, ils ne sont pas libres pour faire le travail qu'il faut. Deuxième chose qui nous bloque, c'est l'ignorance, c'est le manque d'éducation. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous, au niveau de notre organisation, nous avons créé la Fondation Sahel pour la défense des droits de l'homme, l'appui à l'éducation. Parce que nous pensons que c'est l'éducation qui fait défaut. Et troisième chose qui nous bloque, c'est aussi le côté religieux. Parce que l'esclavage en Mauritanie est basé sur l'islam. Et comme les gens sont ignorants, ils ne comprennent pas tellement leur islam, ils pensent que l'esclavage est le 6e pilier de la religion. Et que comme c'est venu dans la religion, on ne doit pas y être contre. Alors que la religion islamique, comme on l'a vu, n'a rien à voir avec l'esclavage, surtout pas avec cet esclavage tel que pratiqué en Mauritanie, au Mali, au Niger, et qui n'est pas l'esclavage moderne, qui est l'esclavage traditionnel, l'esclavage tel que vécu depuis des siècles. Alors voilà ce que j'avais à dire pour respecter le temps. Et si vous avez une question, je suis là pour le répondre.
Thank you. Thank you, Braham, giving us your perspectives from Mauritania in West Africa. Quite a number of interesting intersectionalities coming across from the West Africa region. Of course, you've highlighted some things that George and, of course, Dr. Modi had highlighted on issues of strengthening institutional framework to handle issues of justice. And that's where we have, the theme, actionable justice towards, preventing human trafficking. You've talked about lack of knowledge, that's awareness and things to do with education, governance issues. There's issues of course, culture where religion is coming in and beliefs, and of course, the political goodwill. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And of course, we now can see the pattern, especially on some of the, barriers of preventing human trafficking, especially in West Africa. So we go to the only lady in this panel, Nasma Krelin, just to share with us IOM perspective on what are some of the preventive, critical gaps that exist in preventing human trafficking in Africa. and what are some of the push factors? What are some of the recommendations? Over to you, Nasma. You have 5 minutes. I see your presentation is up. Carry on. Nasma, we can see your screen. Proceed.
Yes, sorry, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the preceding panelists who have given these very concrete experiences from each of their countries. I'll try to give you very quickly an overview of the gaps and the responses that we're trying to provide from the IOM perspective. One thing I wanted to highlight first, just to make sure everybody has heard about it. I don't know if you've heard about the Counter Trafficking Data Collaborative website, the CTDC. It's the first open access portal to include data on tip cases to which many organizations contribute, not just IOM, very obviously. It was launched in 2017, and it currently includes cases of over 156,000 trafficking victims from 189 countries worldwide. So I thought, if you haven't ever heard about it, I thought you might want to hear about it now, and I'll be happy to paste the link in the chat if you want me later on. A few statistics very, very quickly. Worldwide, IOM assists 7,000 to 8,000 victims a year. That represents over 150,000 victims or survivors assisted by IOM and its partners since the early 1990s. And all victims are eligible for our assistance, depending on funding availability, obviously, which is certainly one of the gaps. But otherwise, every victim, every profile, every type of exploitation is considered. Here in this region, Western Central Africa, we have assisted over 6,000 victims of trafficking over the past 5 years, from 2017 to 2023. And it looks like a lot, but in fact it's not, especially if we compare it to the number of migrants that we assist in the region overall through our protection programs. So not only victims of trafficking, but for the same period, we've assisted more than 193,000 persons. So you can see the gap here as well. It's only 6,000 victims that we were able to reach out. And you can see on this slide a bit more information about their profiling. Now, in terms of responding to identified gaps, we have a number of activities, types of activities that are defined in terms of prevention, prosecution, partnerships, and also protection. But to do all of this, and what you can see on these slides are some of the examples of different things we do in different countries in the region. The gaps that we're trying to address are the following. First of all, and I think this has been mentioned, maybe not that directly, but also tackled by other presenters, some countries do not fully align with the Palermo Protocol, and they do not recognize adults as victims of trafficking. So that's an issue. Additionally, there's a confusion regarding identification and terminology related to smuggling and trafficking. I saw somebody mention it in the chat earlier. And that also complicates the identification of victims and their access to specialized services. Hence, the importance of strengthening the review and application of national legislations, because the truth is that very few traffickers are actually investigated or convicted in line with the Palermo Protocol. And often what we also witness is that national counter-tip efforts and anti-tip agencies, they lack the resources and capacities, to put in place national action plans on counter-trafficking, national referral mechanisms and SOPs to protect and assist the victims and the survivors. What is also very clear is that evidence from direct assistance indicates that a substantial caseload of victims of trafficking and significant needs, that there is such significant needs, and yet there remains a lack of dedicated counter-trafficking funding in Central Africa. So we know how much we need it, but still we don't have enough means to address it. For children specifically, lack of alternative care solutions, who do not want or who cannot return to their families in a safe manner, that is an issue. There is an interesting example in Mauritania about foster families, which has come up as an interesting good practice, and we hope to see more of it later on. So, to address these gaps, there's definitely a need to work on prevention, protection, prosecution, along with partners to ensure proper coordination. About protection, more specifically, this is just to show you through our different activities what we actually try to do to address this gap. So we do work on developing or strengthening national referral mechanisms and SOPs in specific countries. We work on mappings of protection partners and SOPs. We do capacity building, we do advocacy, and obviously and very importantly, as has already been mentioned today, we try to work on data collection on possible tip cases to be referred to protection teams. And in everything we do, our approach is certainly centered on direct assistance to victims, and is also trauma centered. Now, in terms of recommendations, I think that the important points that I want to make here is that in several countries in the region here, our work targets the 4 Ps. Without going into detail, what I wanted to say is that what we observe is that there is a need for more cross-border coordination, and there is a need for a regional approach to our work, given the similarities that have also been illustrated today in terms of gaps and most prevalent forms of TIP in Western Central Africa. So there is an important demand by governments to increase the collaboration between countries of origin and destination of victims of trafficking, as well as awareness on the cross-border nature of TIP. You can see examples here of cross-border collaborations that we are working on with different countries. But the last point I want to make here also is to say that we also need to look at the existing regional mechanisms that we can build on, both from the policy perspective and from the operational perspective. So the Niamey Declaration to enhance coordination amongst countries of origin, transit, and destination, along with international agencies such as IOM, but also UNHCR and UNODC. There are, for example, existing agreements on judicial cooperation between Chad, Mali, and Niger, dates back to 2017. There are memorandum of understandings between different countries, the Gambia and Nigeria, the Gambia and Sierra Leone, Niger and Nigeria. As the representative from Senegal also said, it's fine. It's very important also to have these frames, but we also need to support the increase of their application. So these are just a few examples that I wanted to, and a few thoughts I wanted to share with you. I'll just stop here and I'm available for any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nasma, for those good and wonderful insights. I think you've broken down those recommendations in a manner that we can pick them up in subsequent engagement. Those who are my panelists, largely from West Africa, and of course, Nasma from IOM, are tackling some of the critical gaps and of course, what are some of the key recommendations and takeaways? Like you've had participants and members and panelists, is that most of the issues are cross-cutting. There's a lot of intersectionalities, and I think Nasma has just broken down on the need to have collaborations and enhancing those regional partnerships on most of the issues. You could clearly see some of the issues, especially in West Africa, Mauritania, Senegal, and Ghana. Some of the issues, lack of, data, institutional strengthening that is required. Of course, implementing and working on this human trafficking from a data-informed, evidence-informed, working on capacity of the law enforcement agencies to prevent and respond to issues of human trafficking, and of course, looking at how to enhance collaboration between national and civil society organizations and the community and the people in the ground, so that they are able to understand and to respond and partner with the governance. Issues of institutional strengthening, issues of policy also came up. We also saw issues of how to enhance justice system to work. Looking at the 4Ps approach, it's one of the recommendations that going forward we can have. I know that some of the countries have national referral mechanisms, others called national referral guidelines, depending on which country you come from. And of course, some of the protocols that exist, one of it is the Palermo protocols.
Perfect.
We don't have much time.
Yes, I'm so sorry, Evan.
Let me stop there. But I
Yes,
think if there is a question, you can put on the chat and then we can respond. Sorry, there was a lot of internet challenges, especially from the panelists, including myself. We apologize for that.
Thank you so much,
everyone, and thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for moderating that panel. And of course, we understand with the Africa Forum, this is just an amazing group of people. And we, of course, understand the challenges in each region, especially since this is a fully virtual platform. So thank you, everyone. Now we're moving on to our second panel, but I do have some updates. So basically, we have, obviously we are a little bit over our time right now, and our interpreters are available to stay a little bit later. So we're going to push through, some of this timing. What I'd like to recommend is now we're going to move into our second panel before the working groups, and then we will allow our interpreters to stay on. Merci beaucoup à tous. Et maintenant, nous suivre le prochain panel on safeguarding victims of trafficking, evaluating policies of victims of human trafficking in Africa. And Issa Saka, one of our colleagues from Free the Slaves, he's here to lead this panel. Issa is a great colleague. I've worked with him for years on the board and in his capacity. He's done so many things for IOM and UNODC. But one of my favorite parts of his career has actually with his work in Tostan development. This is a group that I actually, when I was thinking about whether I was going to work on modern slavery or genital female mutilation, I was looking at this group and actually thought that this would be a really amazing corollary to our field, women's rights and empowerment and social structures. So I think that's what's really useful is Issa has been able to blend all of this experience from UNODC and IOM and Tostan into his amazing work with us at Free the Slaves. So thank you so much, Issa. On to you.
Thank you so much, Davina, and hi everyone. Good morning. As you said, I'm the West Africa Regional Director, and I'm very honored to moderate this panel. The second panel on safeguarding victims of trafficking, evaluating policies for the protection of victims. So I'm very honored to have on this panel 4 high-level speakers. We would start with Dr. Annette Bogo. She is the Executive Director for Quito Shah Sharia Legal Advice Center. Then we would have Mr. Andrew Kanaga from, Dr. Bogo is from Kenya. Mr. Andrew Kanaga is from Rwanda. He's also the Executive Director for the African Center of Excellence for Access to Justice. and head of research in the same center. We would have the honor also to listen to Madame Ruth Juguna. I hope I pronounced it correctly. She's also Deputy Director for the Children's Service working at the Counter-Trafficking in-Person Secretariat under the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection from Kenya. And I'm also very pleased to have my former colleague from UNODC, Mr. Libere Tamashi Mikiro, who is a former prosecutor from Burundi and also is currently working with UNODC as a judicial corporation specialist. So they will be dealing with, as I was saying, the second panel on safeguarding victim of trafficking. So I will ask each of them to be very a bit late. So I would maybe give them 7 to 8 minutes for them to present, and eventually we'll open for discussions. So please, let's start with Dr. Annette Bogo. You have the floor. Hello, Dr. Bogo? If she is not listening, maybe we can move ahead with Mr. Kananga.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleagues, Free the Slaves, for inviting me to be part of this panel. So I think our panel is looking at safeguarding victims of trafficking, mainly looking at policies. Let me know if you hear me audibly. Do you?
We can hear you very well. Thank you.
So we are trying to look at policies on the African continent. And certainly you will understand that I don't have experience on all African countries. What I've tried to do is to sample a few countries from our own region. Let me begin by thanking the team, Free the Slaves, and colleagues. I've seen a lot of colleagues that I've met before here in Kigali and other forums. Human trafficking is a severe violation of human rights, as you all know, involving the exploitation of individuals through force, frauds, and other means, as you know. And in Africa, the complexity of human trafficking is exacerbated by socioeconomic factors. And I believe some of our colleagues have talked about this political instability and porous borders making the protection of victims a significant challenge for our continent. And I've had previous speakers talking about this. So it's very important for us in this forum to bear in mind that Africa is very peculiar when it comes to handling issues of human trafficking because of so many factors, including those I just mentioned. So in terms of policies, I think we have very good policies on the African continent. And these policies are based on international standards. For instance, I had someone talking about the Palermo Protocol, officially known as the Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. This UN protocol supplements the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, which sets standards based on which some of our legislation on the African continent, but also some of the policies we have on the continent. That these are two international instruments that I think colleagues have alluded to, that most of the countries have tried to look at based on to have their own policies in terms of safeguarding victims of human trafficking. But I also want to say that specifically on the African continent, we have also some frameworks, policies and framework. The African Union has developed several instruments to combat human trafficking, including the Ouagadougou Action Plan to combat trafficking in human beings, especially women and children, adopted in 2006. This plan emphasizes a coordinated approach focusing on prevention, victim protection, and prosecution of traffickers. We also have some interesting policies and laws and frameworks to look at in the region, especially in the ECOWAS and SADC. Let me also focus on my own region, East Africa, which has a new bill on anti-trafficking, and the new bill here in East Africa It was adopted in 2016, and it is primarily based on the Paralemo Protocol, which is very important. It adopts all the measures and standards. So another example I can give on the African continent, for instance, is Rwanda. Rwanda has a new policy. It has a legislation, and the policy in Rwanda is looking particularly to issues of how to punish heavily the criminals, people who are involved in trafficking. The policy is also looking at victim protection. The policy is also looking at how institutions can collaborate. Someone talked about partnership as part of the 4Ps, partnership, very important. Victim protection, strong collaboration between institutions. And if you look at across the board, you see a lot of these things either in the legislations that our countries have adopted, or even in policies and frameworks and action plans. Very important to mention. So, for instance, giving an example of collaboration in Rwanda, we have one-stop center that deals with victim protection. We call it Sang One Stop Center. It's one of the, I think it has been very successful, and we've seen a lot of countries coming to benchmark. Initially, it was established as a center that would be dealing with GBV-related crimes, but they extended that mandate to include victims of human trafficking. So importantly, I think there is a lot we see on the African continent in terms of development. But let me also give examples of other countries. South Africa has one of the best legal framework, for instance. They have the Anti-Trafficking Act of 2013, my colleague from Kenya, and that Act of South Africa is very interesting. If you look at it, it focuses on victim protection and law enforcement, very important. We have one in Nigeria, for instance, that focuses on the agency that is supposed to, national agency for the prohibition of trafficking in persons. Kenya has also an interesting example to look at. They have the Counter-Trafficking Act that was adopted in 2010, and it has very good element that we can learn from. Victim Assistance Trust Fund, and this is very important when it comes to, and it's very unique in the region. They have a very specific fund. Public awareness and education. It also talks about shelter and care, which is also very important, and then legal assistance, free legal aid. I know time is not on my side, but I want to talk about legal protections as I conclude, moderator. Very important point here. As a lawyer, I think I should emphasize, and this is actually one of the areas that the Legal Aid Forum is focusing on, legal protection. Two things I want to emphasize across the board. All our legal frameworks and policies should, if not yet, focus on the right to remain, policies that allow victims to remain in the country temporarily or permanently, especially if their return to the country poses a risk. We have a lot of examples where victims have been returned to countries where, their own countries, and there is a high risk of them not being safe. Another important legal safeguard that we should be looking at across the board in our jurisdiction is non-punishment principle, ensuring that victims are not prosecuted for crimes committed as direct consequence of being trafficked, such as immigration violations. So we have in Rwanda, if I had time, I would give you examples. We have some who have been, deported to Rwanda, and later on to be accused of other crimes like violating our national laws. This, when it comes to legal protection and safeguarding victims, these two principles are very important. Of course, reintegration programs. And moderator, as I conclude, I want to highlight three things as I conclude. Challenges in the policy implementation. One, despite, resource constraints, everyone I had, they mentioned lack of resources. This is very limited funding and personnel for victim support services and law enforcement. We see this within civil society and other agencies, but also within our law enforcement that are involved in assisting our victims. Corruption and capacity. Corruption within government and enforcement agencies, which can undermine anti-trafficking efforts. This is something to be mindful about. The last point is cross-border coordination. I think previous speakers did mention about this. Difficulties in coordinating efforts and sharing information across border, which is essential given the transnational nature of trafficking. In conclusion, Mr. Moderator, The protection of victims of human trafficking in Africa requires a multifaceted approach, combining robust legal frameworks, comprehensive victim support services, effective international and regional cooperation. While significant progress has been made, continued efforts are needed if we are ready to safeguard and protect victims. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kanaga, for this great presentation. You put you mentioned the legal and institutional framework. You mentioned the challenges, and you specific recommendation. Thanks a lot. We will move without further delay with Madame Ruth Juguna, if she's available. Madame Juguna.
Yes, I'm
Hello,
available.
yes,
can you
please. You have the floor. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. So just continue what my counterpart has talked about. In the region, most countries have signed the Palermo Protocol, which is the most.
Do you mind putting your camera on, please?
Okay. Is it on?
Thank you very much. Great. Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to my presentation.
Excellent.
Yeah, you can see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, yes. So which is the most signed protocol across the world? I think 182 countries have signed the Palermo Protocol. So most countries in the region have signed that protocol. And then we have the Global Compact for Safe and Regular Migration, which is the first intergovernmentally negotiated agreement prepared under the auspices of the United Nations, covering all dimensions of international migration in a holistic and comprehensive manner. Yes, it is non-binding, that respects states' sovereign right to determine who enters and stays in the territory and demonstrates commitment to international cooperation on migration. And key areas or aspirations that are talked about in the Global Compact for Migration is the issues of the protection of victims of trafficking, issues such as having safe houses and assisting them in forms of direct assistance to victims of trafficking in persons. We also have the Agenda 2063, the Goal 18, which is our first 10-year implementation plan, which including ending all forms of violence, child labor, child exploitation, child marriages, human trafficking, and recruitment of child soldiers. But you all know, again, issues of child marriage and FGM, for example, are also forms of trafficking in persons. Again, in Africa, most substantial inputs on the SDGs preparation process, including the submission of the Common African Position of the Post-2015 Development Agenda. Also prepared a broad-based consultations across continents. This brings about widely consulting on various issues in regard to trafficking in persons, among them issues of child labor, and of course, it's also a form of trafficking in persons and also forced labor. Again, as a region, recognizing the close linkages between the scourges and the underlying causes. So there's need to bring under them a policy framework to build policy coherence and synergy at the national, regional, and continental levels. In terms of enhancing protection of victims in Africa, the issue of joint trainings for law enforcement in the region is very important. When we have countries come and meet and they have joint trainings on various issues, for example, in terms of rescuing of victims, for example, what are the protocols to follow? What guides them in terms of assisting victim assistance? Again, an issue of increased prevention efforts, such as awareness creation, is also very important. Do we create awareness among the region as a preventive measure for them to, prevention is better than cure. So if you prevent at that particular level, and then you'll even use less money in terms of protection, because protection may include issues such as repatriation from the country of destination to the country of origin, which is a very expensive process. The national referral mechanisms has been mentioned. Not all countries in the region have national referral mechanisms, so it will be important as in the region to have or to develop national referral mechanism and have focal points of each country. And as a region, the focal points of the national referral mechanism can be having meetings and updating each other on what is happening in the region. Again, standard operating procedures on how to identify the victims. Do you have a standardized way in the region to identify the victims? Do you have a standardized way in protection of the victims? Do we have a standardized way in terms of return and reintegration of these victims and ensuring that they have successful reintegration in communities? Issues of safe house had been said earlier. For example, in Kenya, we have a challenge of safe houses. Most of them do not cater for boys and for men. It's quite a gap. For example, like in Kenya, it also reflects regionally. So safe houses will be very important for us to have in terms of victim protection. Again, regional agreements has been mentioned earlier. How do we bargain as a bloc, like in the region? If, for example, we are bargaining for better pay, for example, in the GCC countries, can we come together and come up with agreements that, and when we bargain together, we have more power. So if we have our migrants going to those countries, we minimize the risk of trafficking. They're probably paid better. They're probably adhering to the agreements that we'll sign with those countries. So that I think that is a gap that we have in the region, but we need to promote that regional agreements. The issues of joint investigations in the region are very important. The international police, they work together. How can we strengthen this in the region? And then member states to establish trust funds. In Kenya, we have a National Assistance Trust Fund for victims of trafficking persons established under Section 22 of the Counter-Trafficking Persons Act. It is administered by a board of trustees, and the money is used for victim assistance in line with our Section 15 of the Counter-Trafficking Persons Act. So the fund assists victims of trafficking persons in return to and from Kenya, resettlement, reintegration, provision of shelter and other basic needs, psychosocial support, appropriate medical assistance, legal assistance, and any other assistance, necessary assistance that a victim may require. This is something that needs to be promoted in the region. And it had been mentioned earlier that we have what we call the National Assistance Trust Fund guidelines for assisting victims of trafficking in persons. And these guidelines, they provide a criteria for support to victims through the National Assistance Trust Fund. And we all understand that the needs of victims of trafficking persons are often complex and require a comprehensive approach. Therefore, these guidelines seek to address these complicated underlying challenges. And it also guides to provide a criterion for disbursement of funds and other assistance to individual applicants and organizations, taking into consideration, of course, the victims' basic human rights. The guidelines also provide a mechanism on monitoring and reporting the utilization of the disbursed funds. You may be wondering where we get the funds from. For the funds are appropriated by the Parliament, of course, through the National Treasury. So we have money that comes from the government for victim assistance. Yes.
Madam
So
Juguna, please, just 1 more minute, please.
Yes, I'm about to finish. Again, in terms of joint intelligence sharing across the region, it needs to be strengthened. It's not very strong. We should also have plans of actions. We have the national plans of actions, which are in 4 pillars: prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships. That will enhance safeguarding the victims of trafficking in persons, and then also having, as a region, enhanced social protection programs will be very key, because we understand that why victims actually, we have these victims because of the vulnerabilities. And therefore, if we are able to enhance social protection programs, it will help prevent trafficking in persons and safeguard the victim. That is all I have from my end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have come back on the national and institutional framework, legal framework and institutional framework, but you have highlighted that actually what is missing is operational mechanism. We can see that you mentioned that we hardly have national and clear referral mechanism, standard operating procedures, issues for safe houses that has come back on your discussion, regional agreement, bilateral and multilateral agreement, and joint investigation. So the legal framework is here, the institutional framework is here, but we lack operational mechanism to really protect these victims. So thank you very much for this great presentation. Let's move on to now our colleague from UNODC, Mr. Libere Tamashi Mikiro. Mr. Libere, you have the floor.
Bonjour à tous, j'espère que vous m'entendez et j'ai allumé mon caméra.
Oui, on t'entend bien.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais vous parler de la protection et l'assistance des victimes de traite en Afrique de l'Ouest. Du moins, c'est l'arsenal juridique que je vais développer dans un temps très limité de 10 minutes. Mais je vais essayer quand même d'être très bref, mais aussi concise. Mais d'emblée, en Afrique de l'Ouest, je ne vais pas aller répéter ce que mes collègues ont dit à propos de la législation internationale. Notamment, je vais préciser que la législation internationale sur la protection des victimes de traite, on se base essentiellement sur la Convention des Nations Unies contre la criminalité transnationale et organisée, où en son article 24, il souligne, il appelle les États partis à la Convention de prendre des mesures et des politiques pour protéger les victimes de traite, surtout en cas d'intimidation et de menaces. Et le principe de la protection, c'est l'obligation de chaque État à prendre ces mesures et ces politiques-là dans la protection des victimes de traite. Et la mesure d'application de la Convention, on a, du moins en la matière de traite, il y a effectivement le protocole 1 additionnel à la Convention qui souligne à son article 6 et qui donne plus de détails sur les mesures à prendre, le type d'assistance à donner aux victimes de traite. Et en son article 6, il insiste sur la protection de la vie privée et l'identité des victimes. Et, dans le protocole aussi, le protocole invite les États à s'aligner d'une manière, dans leur système juridique, à s'aligner aux directives données par la Convention et ce protocole même. Et même, il insiste sur le type d'assistance qu'il faut donner aux victimes de traite, et notamment l'assistance médicale d'abord, selon l'état de santé de la victime. Il précise aussi l'assistance psychologique, l'assistance juridique et judiciaire pour la victime qui demanderait une indemnisation aux auteurs de traite. Il y a aussi l'assistance liée à la communication, notamment fournir les interprètes aux victimes pour pouvoir communiquer, exprimer leurs besoins. Il y a aussi l'assistance liée à la réintégration, l'assistance liée à la réadaptation, l'assistance du moins liée à remettre la personne dans son environnement familial et éducatif adéquat, effectivement, sans oublier que les victimes doivent être hébergées. Et ça, c'est une obligation aussi bien de la part de l'État d'origine où la victime est trouvée, mais aussi bien de la part de l'État de destination où la victime sera trouvée. Et il y a universellement aussi, sur le plan international, je vais souligner la résolution de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, c'est la résolution 4034, qui souligne les principes fondamentaux de justice relatifs aux victimes de la criminalité. Et ça, c'est d'une manière globale, ça n'évoque pas seulement les victimes de traite. Et là, la résolution, il insiste beaucoup sur la formation du personnel qui est appelé à assister et protéger les victimes de traite. Il insiste aussi sur la prise en compte des besoins spécifiques des victimes de traite. Et c'est juste la spécificité de cette résolution qui date de plusieurs décennies. Il a été pris en 1985, mais reste d'actualité, reste en vigueur jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Aussi sur le plan régional alors, en Afrique de l'Ouest, je vais souligner essentiellement deux textes juridiques qui relèvent des accords régionaux, des accords régionaux. L'un, c'est en rapport avec un accord conclu dans le cadre de la CEDEAO. C'est l'accord multilatéral de coopération régionale sur la traite de personnes, en particulier les femmes et les enfants. Et dans ce texte, on insiste beaucoup sur la définition des obligations communes des États, du moins où les États sont appelés de prendre des mesures de protection des victimes. Le texte insiste aussi sur l'adoption des obligations spécifiques pour chaque État en fonction de la victime ou en fonction où la victime est localisée. Mais également, le texte, il a la spécificité d'insister sur la coopération en matière judiciaire pour la répression et punir les auteurs des actes de traite. Et donc, dans ce texte, la spécificité, c'est l'appel aux États de mettre en place des stratégies de coopération judiciaire afin d'éradiquer la criminalité liée à la traite. Et en deuxième lieu, les textes régionaux que j'avais soulignés, c'est le plan d'Ouagadougou. Mon ami du Rwanda avait déjà souligné ça. Et le texte en question, il met l'accent il appelle les États à s'aligner aux textes internationaux en matière de traite. Il met aussi en exergue l'adoption des politiques de protection des victimes, mais également, il insiste sur la tenue d'une base de données sur la criminalité liée à la traite. Et je vais souligner en passant un projet de texte qui est endossé par l'Union africaine qui concerne la politique de prévention de la traite des personnes en Afrique. C'est un texte qui est à l'état embryonnaire, mais qui, une fois adopté par l'Assemblée générale de l'Union africaine, pourra servir de guide, de référence pour tout État qui voudra asseoir une politique d'éradication de la traite. Alors, avant de finir, je vais parler des plateformes, je dirais des cadres de dialogue qui ont été mis en place en Afrique de l'Ouest. Je vais souligner d'abord la déclaration de Niamey, qui est un cadre de dialogue où certains États d'Afrique de l'Ouest et de l'Europe ont adopté une déclaration en 2018 en vue de lutter contre. C'est une action, en fait, je dirais, c'est pour mettre en place une action coordonnée de lutte contre la traite de personnes et le trafic illicite des migrants entre l'Afrique de l'Ouest et l'Europe. Et à titre de passage aussi, l'ONUDC, il a été commis comme secrétaire du mécanisme de suivi des recommandations issues de cette déclaration de Niamey. Et je vais revenir aussi sur une autre plateforme, je dirais, un cadre de dialogue dans le cadre d'une migration, dans le cadre de la migration. Il s'agit du processus de Rabat. Le processus de Rabat, il est encore appelé processus euro-africain sur la migration et le développement. Il a pour objectif de créer un cadre de dialogue et de consultation pour répondre aux enjeux à la route migratoire ouest-africaine. Il est constitué donc d'une cinquantaine de pays, aussi bien européens et africains, mais également la Commission européenne et la CEDEAO également. Alors, pour terminer, j'ai voulu vous partager un exemple de législation en matière de législation nationale du moins. J'ai voulu vous citer un exemple de législation nationale en matière de protection des victimes de traite. J'ai donné l'exemple du Tchad. Le Tchad, il a adopté une très belle loi de protection des victimes de traite où il oblige les États, du moins les autorités judiciaires et administratives, de prendre toutes les mesures nécessaires afin de protéger les victimes de traite identifiées ou des victimes qui sont présumées ou des personnes présumées être victimes de traite. Et toute une gamme de services, est définie dans cette loi. Il y a effectivement des services d'assistance sociale, d'assistance médicale, psychologique et sécuritaire aussi. Il y a aussi l'assistance judiciaire.
Ok, Libéré, merci de conclure.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais conclure juste une minute. Et donc, en termes de gap, tout cet arsenal juridique que j'ai souligné, on comprend tous de la même manière dans plusieurs parties du globe, il y a cet écart qui existe entre l'existence d'un arsenal juridique et l'application. Donc, il y a toujours un écart, soit par manque de moyens, effectivement, comme les autres l'ont dit, mais également par manque de volonté politique. Et donc aussi, la protection des victimes de traite, c'est dans le cadre de la répression de cette criminalité. Il y a un défaut de coopération entre ces pays. Il y a un défaut de stratégie de coopération pour réprimer d'une manière efficace cette criminalité. Et Monsieur Issa, je vais me limiter là. Merci pour m'avoir accordé le temps supplémentaire.
Merci beaucoup, Libéré. Merci encore une fois. Je pense qu'on a ressenti dans les trois interventions quelque chose qui est revenu, c'est qu'il y a un cadre juridique qui est là, qui est assez fourni. Il y a un cadre institutionnel également qui est là. Mais ce qui manque, c'est la mise en œuvre de ces décisions-là au niveau des lois. Il n'y a pas suffisamment de fonds qui sont alloués pour la prise en charge de victimes. Donc, vous avez parlé du manque de volonté politique. Ça se rejoint. Il n'y a pas suffisamment de structures de prise en charge. Les structures de prise en charge qui sont disponibles sont dans bien des cas gérées par des structures privées, ce sont les ONG. Il y a une insuffisance de capacité en termes d'assistance et de prise en charge des victimes. Il y a une absence de procédures standards opérationnalisées, de procédures opérationnelles standardisées plutôt. Il y a un manque de coordination, des fois au niveau des pays, mais également au niveau régional. Et il y a dans bien des cas une absence de coopération entre les services qui sont dans la prise en charge et la protection des victimes. Donc, je ne vais pas m'attarder encore outre mesure sur ce que vous avez dit. C'est vraiment intéressant. Je vous remercie encore une fois et je passe la parole à Davina. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous et bon travail à tous nos panélistes. Now we're moving towards our working groups, and we've actually been able to come back a little bit on schedule. So thank you so much for that, Issa. You've really done a tremendous job. We're going to have two working groups on closing the gaps, developing critical steps to address the prevention and protection of vulnerable groups. The first room is going to be on children with our facilitator, Faloshade Bamim Boy from the Kids and Teens Resource Center in Nigeria. And then the second room will be LGBTQ plus persons with Angela Namatovu from Azali Women in Uganda. Now, there are a few housekeeping issues to note. First, we will not have simultaneous translations in the rooms, so you will want to use captions. Pour les personnes qui parlent français, nous n'avons pas le traducteur qui travaille dans les chambres pour les groupes de travail maintenant. Ensuite, vous devrez changer les captions entre anglais et français. Ensuite, vous pouvez lire que vos collègues qui parlent anglais a dit. Je crois que vous pouvez la faire avec le même icône sur votre écran d'interprétation où vous pouvez changer entre anglais à français pour les captions. Oui, c'est comment de changer cela? Je crois que oui. Also, perfect. For Fellowshade, we're really impressed to have somebody who's worked with children for so many years. She's been doing this for almost 13 years, and she has a master's degree in business administration and also an executive MBA in leadership. She's worked in child labor remediation, social and behavioral change communication, and she's worked with so many organizations, the ILO, the Beyond Beans Foundation, Foundation, and now the Kids and Teens Resource Center. Apologies. She's managed loads of projects here, and I think she'll be able to lead a very fruitful discussion in the first workout group on children. Then Angela has done some amazing work. Namatovu Angela has done some great work. She's a survivor leader, a feminist, and a community paralegal based in Uganda. And now she's the executive director of Azali Women's Organization in Uganda. And she creates safe spaces, uplifts voices of gender and sexual minorities. And I think she'll have a very interesting perspective to add to that group as well. So now we'll be breaking out into our rooms and we'll be reconvening in about 25 minutes. So if everyone can kind of just keep that in mind as we moderate our next panels. Thank you all.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to quickly explain the breakout rooms. If you click on the breakout rooms at the bottom of your screen, it should open up and you should see two different options for joining the breakout rooms. You can click join on either one of those options and it should get you into the right place. If you don't have a breakout rooms option on your main screen, click on the three dots on your screen, and your breakout rooms could also be under that option.
Hey, sorry, apologies. Could you please repeat that? I'm afraid I can't find.
Sure, yes. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be four squares that kind of look like a window. If you click on that, it should pop up with two options to join the rooms. There should be room A1 for the session on children and room A2 for LGBTQ persons. If there's not a separate icon at the bottom of your screen for the breakout rooms, you can also click on the three dots more, and it may be under there depending on how your device is set up. It looks like most people have been able to join a room. Is there anyone having trouble still entering a room?
Can we have Laura? Oh, that's it.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Davina, are you around? Are you here?
Hi, everyone. So I believe we should all be back now, and we'll let the facilitators lead breakout summaries. We'll start with Foul Shade first, please.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. And we're glad to be back from the session, though it was a very interesting one, but very short. So key recommendations that we got from participants on the group. Yes, everyone agreed that funding was a major challenge, that we need to look at, more funding for interventions around child labor and forced labor. Also, another key point that came out was, making use of existing structures. One of the participants mentioned that there is a West African coalition against trafficking in persons and illegal migration through the NACTL, that we could leverage on these existing platforms to, carry out our intervention and also ensure multi-sectoral collaboration and cross-border collaboration. Yes, the third point is strengthening our gatekeeping systems in the rural areas. It was clear that there's a lot of awareness creation in the urban areas, but the rural areas where these issues of child trafficking are predominant, they do not have so much information. So there's need for more education, awareness creation, and not just that, there's need for people to be educated on the referral pathways where they can, and where they can report cases, because when they just have the information, but they don't know where to get help when they face such issues, then it might be challenging for them to report. So we need to focus more on creating awareness in the rural communities and making sure that these people are educated and empowered. Then the fourth point was on advocacy. There's still need, we know that there are a lot of advocacy efforts going on, but there's still need for high-level advocacy. Like for us, what we do in Kids and Teens Resource Center, in these rural communities, we identify influencers, gatekeepers that can champion the cause and also make sure that there's a lot of action when it comes to implementation, because one key thing that we mentioned also was the fact that we have a lot of policies, a lot of beautiful laws, but implementation and action is usually the challenge. But when we involve these key people at the local level, they will be able to, champion the change that they want. Then the fifth point is on, I think I've mentioned that education, both formal and informal education, making sure that we go to the informal sector and not just the schools to educate people and orientate them on the issues of child labor and child trafficking. Then the last one is the family strengthening system and mechanisms. It was mentioned that we need to work very well on this issue. Sometimes what makes people vulnerable to trafficking is their condition, because they are vulnerable. what we are doing as an organization. We are supporting currently. We are working with the government to, improve the access of people to social services. And one of such things that we are doing is updating the social register to ensure that we have a social register of vulnerable groups in the communities, such that it will be easy for them to access benefits and other social services that are available. So for me, that is all that we could discuss during the breakout session before our time was up. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate that readout. And then Angela, would you like to go next?
Yes, please. We had a very interesting working group with 12 people. So what we discussed mostly, what we came up with is the need to advocate for inclusive policies for LGBTIQ persons, because most of the laws that are in place now are not LGBT inclusive. Trust me, my country, Uganda, has a very good legal framework when it comes to combating human trafficking, but then they are not protective, they're not inclusive of LGBTIQ persons. Even when they talk about discrimination, they talk about race, they talk about economic status, but they never talk about discrimination based on sexual orientation. And that makes LGBTIQ persons very prone to human trafficking. Secondly, awareness creation. We need to create more awareness so that we can change societal attitudes towards LGBTIQ issues or issues affecting LGBTIQ survivors. Then we also talked about queer survivor participation. We need to include LGBTIQ persons in the anti-trafficking space, because you realize that most survivors, LGBTIQ survivors, don't actually want to come out and maybe report or maybe participate, speak out because of fear of judgment, fear of being discriminated. You understand? So if we can improve, develop strategies on how LGBTIQ persons can be included within the anti-human trafficking movement for actionable justice. Then also funding and supporting and building the capacity of LGBTIQ organizations that are supporting victims and survivors of human trafficking. Then lastly, LGBTIQ inclusive and friendly support services. We talked about the LGBTIQ shelters for survivors, because the current existing shelters or support services are not addressing the specific needs of LGBTIQ survivors and victims of human trafficking. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Those are really informative sessions. And I can't believe how you all performed this magic, but we somehow made it back on schedule. So thank you all for doing this. It's really amazing. I can't take any credit for it because I'm not even quite sure how it happened. So thank you all for an excellent first day. Tomorrow we will be reconvening at 10:45 a.m. The room will open GMT, and then we'll start at 11. Thank you again for being so prompt. And Dr. Balfour, is there anything else we want to add for housekeeping?
No, that's it. Thank you all, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you for other great panelists and speakers tomorrow. So see you all bright and early tomorrow. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.